Good evening, everybody. It is 5:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you to everybody who is with us this evening. Tonight we have myself, Bill Polk, Sports Director. We also have on the call with us Vice President of Sports, Brittany, and she will be manning the chat for us. We have microphones turned off. This is kind of something a little bit new for me anyway, working with the webinars. We'd like to thank Melissa Anger from Special Olympics Maryland for helping out with this process. I think we're going to use this process for most of our trainings, if not all. I like the way we sign up for it with just a nice, easy little link. We'll do a preseason chat just like we are this evening for basketball. We'll do that preseason chat for each of our sports moving forward. That way we can just kind of focus on the X's and O's of our coach trainings for each of the sports. So we'll go ahead and get things started. There are some pretty exciting things that are going to be happening with Special Olympics this year as far as paperwork is concerned, competition, registration, and coach certifications. We're going to take the opportunity to phase in a lot of this stuff that we're going to discuss tonight and into the coach educations over the course of a year. So that it's not going to be a big shock to everybody. You'll have plenty of time to kind of look at the adjustments, and we're looking at piloting a lot of this information that you're going to get this evening. Sue Hill is going to discuss some of the information that we have paperwork wise as we digitize the movement. So during the coaches clinic next week, she'll begin talking about some of that kind of information, and then coach education moving forward, I will include that information as far as paperwork is concerned. So paperwork, we really need you to begin to submit paperwork pretty soon. Okay, we don't want to get into the habit of waiting until the last possible second to turn things in. As we look at some of the paperwork issues, having a conversation with Sue, a lot of it is coming in late, coming in incomplete. So if we're waiting until that close to that deadline and the paperwork is incomplete, that's where we begin seeing some of the issues that we have as far as athletes not being able to participate. So please submit that paperwork, the packets for the athletes and volunteers as soon as you receive them. Don't wait for those deadlines. If there are issues with the paperwork, and again, if we cannot get those issues resolved before the deadline, then there's that chance that individuals may be disqualified from competition. All athletes, unified partners, coaches, and other volunteers must have the proper forms completed and submitted prior to starting their involvement in any of the Special Olympic sports training programs. This is for the health and safety of our athletes, as well as for the protection of Special Olympics Montana and all of our volunteers. Coaches should work with their respective leadership and Sue well in advance of the start of any training season to determine which athletes and volunteers have their forms, certifications current and valid through the end of the season, and which will need to have forms completed prior to their involvement with any of the new training programs. Just a reminder, we've talked a little bit about this over the course of last year with coach education. No athlete or volunteer may participate in any manner in a Special Olympics Montana program without a valid and current medical form, communicable disease waiver, and/or that volunteer application, and any of the other necessary volunteer certifications that we may need. There are absolutely no exceptions to this policy. Again, some of those issues that we have seen and that Sue has been able to track for us: incomplete paperwork, rushing to get things turned in at the last moment, so we tend to miss some items. Checked boxes, believe it or not, seem to be a big issue. And some of those forms, we need to make sure that we're checking boxes. Sometimes the information that we're missing is that simple. We just missed a box. Or turning in late. If we turn paperwork in late, then it has a huge snowball effect for the entire tournament. Not not just basketball, not just bowling, but the summer games as well. And on that grand of a scale with that many athletes and volunteers and coaches, then it does make our division a little bit more difficult, and then our scheduling of our events as well. So again, please take the time to make sure paperwork is on time. Our SOMT must-haves that we talk about in all of our trainings: athlete medical forms for athletes, our athlete consent forms, athlete code of conduct, and our CDWs. Unified partners and volunteers, Class A volunteer unified partner form, athlete code of conduct, background checks and reference checks for 17 and under and 18 over, and then our protective behaviors, and then the CDW as well. We're going to begin talking a little bit about the direction that we're going to go coach education wise. As you can see, a few things here. We're not going to discuss it at this moment. We'll talk about a couple of things as the training tonight moves on in the next couple of slides, and then we'll get it with coach education as well. Again, this is more of a, we're leaning towards moving to this direction. We're going to pilot some new information as we move with our coach education. We're going to start looking at levels. So we have an assistant coach, a coach, and then we'll have head coach as well. Class A volunteer forms, background checks, reference checks, protective behaviors, communicable disease waivers, and concussion trainings. Any of our volunteers, coaches, anybody who is directly working with our athletes in training or coaching, they need to have that concussion training complete. If they do not have that concussion training complete, we're going to ask that they are not involved working with their athletes. So that's going to be an important part of coach education moving forward. We want to make sure that all of our athletes are well taken care of. And then we'll get into some of our levels here. Again, we're looking to adjust that structure that we have at Special Olympics Montana. Some of the things that we're going to do will reflect the direction that the sports team would like our programs to go. And some of this reflects the direction that SONA is taking as well. Some of the restructuring is already a part of what we do. It just has not been recorded. It hasn't been well maintained. So we're going to propose these levels with varying levels of involvement. We're going to begin phasing this in again during the course of this year, and then you'll have the year in order to get some of this information taken care of. Again, all certifications are going to be valid for 3 years, and anybody who is working directly with the coaching or the training of athletes, again, we need to have that concussion certification. So just a glimpse tonight into the future of coaching. We're going to talk about this more at the Coaches Clinic, and then we're going to talk about it a little bit more in each of our coach education's trainings as we move throughout the course of the year, again, phasing this in. So we're going to have a level 1, which is an assistant coach. The first step on the pathway to becoming a Special Olympics coach is the assistant coach. It introduces you to the basics of Special Olympics sport. An assistant coach is interested in preparing to become a coach or play a supporting role at practice. So again, helping our athletes at any time. This person is interested in working with the athletes, but is not able to commit to a full-time coaching role at this point. So the needs that we'll have for a level 1 coach, and these needs will need to be renewed every 3 years. We have to have that Class A volunteer form, background check, protective behaviors, and a concussion training because we're going to be working with athletes. None of this is any different than what we do currently. What we will ask for our assistant coaches to take a coaching level 1 sport assistant class that is hosted on SO Learn. We'll have to have an account for this class, and there is no charge for you. Any of these classes that we are asking you to take as volunteer coaches, there will be no charge. Or you take the Coaching Unified Sports. So if you are coaching unified athletes, you don't have to take the level 1 sport assistant class. You would have to take the unified sports class instead. Our level 2 would be coach. All coaches at this level should complete sport-specific coach certifications for each sport coached. We already do that. Coaches will take responsibility for leading training sessions for groups of athletes and understand the Special Olympic sports rules. Ideally, the coach will work under the mentorship of a head coach when available. Coaches are responsible for athlete development and planning, developing your coaching team, and preparing you and your athletes for competition. Part of this process is ensuring that athlete paperwork is complete, rosters and registrations are complete and completed correctly, and then returned to SOMT before the deadlines. And that divisioning scores are done accurately to ensure fair competition at our events. Our needs for a level 2 or coach would be that Class A volunteer form, background check, reference checks, protective behaviors training, concussion training, and then sport-specific certifications. And we take care of those sport-specific certifications when we do coach education. So in August and September, you'll get your basketball certification if you attend one of the trainings. And then for a class, we would ask our level 2 coaches to take the Principles of Coaching class that is hosted on CoachTube. And again, you'll need an account, but the charge is free. And then you would either need to take a level 2 coaching class or that Coaching Unified Sports class if you are one of our unified coaches. And then our third level, level 3, would be what we will refer to as our head coaches. The head coach is ultimately responsible for the total practice environment of the athlete. You as head coach should know, understand, and abide by the Special Olympic sports rules, the rules of the sport you are coaching, and any modifications set forth by the governing body of that sport, including modifications that we at SOMT have. The head coach should develop a training program that includes conditioning, instruction on competition and rules, a minimum of 8 weeks of training prior to state competition, and execute the legal duties of a coach by ensuring that the practice environment is safe, properly planning the activity, supervising the activity closely, oversee and evaluate all of your assistants and volunteers for that sport, and ensure all athlete and volunteer paperwork is fully completed and returned before deadlines. Again, certifications renew every 3 years. We'll need that Class A volunteer form, a background check, reference check, protective behaviors training, concussion training, and sport-specific certifications. You would need the Principles of Coaching class, the Level 3 coaching class, or the Unified Sports class. And in addition to the Level 3 coaching class or the Principles or the Unified Sports, we would ask our head coaches to also take an additional class hosted by NFHS Learn. And again, you'll need an account, but they are free classes. We would need to take a class on heat illness prevention, sports nutrition, or sportsmanship. Again, these are just some adjustments that we're going to make within our coaching levels that we're going to hopefully get put forth throughout the course of the year. Coaches can start on this at any time. It's in GMS, so when we get the certifications met by our coaches, then we can go ahead and update you in GMS as far as what your level is and what your certifications would be. We're also going to make an adjustment on the registration process. We're going to pilot a new fillable spreadsheet. The fillable spreadsheets will also have drop-down menus, and these fillable sheets will upload directly into GMS. This is a process that's used by many Special Olympics organizations throughout the country, and it should make registering for our games a smoother process for us. So again, we'll begin piloting that. We'll talk a little bit about that in the Coaches Clinic next week, and then we'll continue talking about that in coach education as well. Our season deadlines for this year. Our roster deadline is going to be September 29th. Rosters must be submitted on the form that we send out and returned via email. Scans at this time are no longer going to work within the system, so we need to reach out to Special Olympics, to the sports team for support. If you need support filling in these fillable spreadsheets. Forms are again going to be uploaded into GMS, and they must be filled out correctly for all athletes, unified partners, coaches, and volunteers for participating within your program. The rosters are going to establish who is eligible to compete at the state competition. All rosters will be submitted to me, bpolk@somt.org, no later than September 29th. Last day for forms to be submitted. These forms will be submitted to Sue Hill. That will also be September 29th. Every athlete must have a complete medical form and a CDW valid through November 11th, 2023. We need to make sure within the paperwork, within our green lists that have been sent out, we are noting that they are valid through the end of competition. Okay, end of competition would be November 11th, 2023 for our state basketball tournament. Every coach, partner, volunteer must have a completed volunteer application, protective behavior certification, and CDW, again, valid through the end of the tournament on November 11th. All coaches must have sport-specific certifications for basketball, valid through November 11th, 2023. All paperwork, again, must be submitted to Sue Hill before 5 o'clock on September 29th. Athletes, coaches, volunteers who do not have current paperwork for the entirety of the basketball season are subject to being scratched from the games. No exceptions on our paperwork because, again, it is protecting you as a coach, volunteer, and it's protecting the athlete, and it's protecting Special Olympics Montana as well. Competition registration and assessments will be due on October 20th. That's final registrations, and those final registrations will be due to me no later than 5 o'clock on October 20th. Delegation members, team rosters, and their events must be finalized. Individuals on the roster without an event will be deleted from competition. Team rosters are set at this point, and no changes can occur. Anyone submitting after this date is not eligible for state competition. Again, we want to ensure that we are beginning the process now to determine which athletes, partners, coaches, and volunteers need to have this updated information. So these green lists that get sent out, they have information that you need to know for athletes, information that we need to know for our partners, for our volunteers, for our coaches. Sue sent out some information regarding codes and colors on the last green list. Again, red is expired paperwork, and blue is paperwork that will expire within the next 3 months. STONA has sent out a new method for team and individual assessment. We are going to continue with what we have used in the past. We feel it gives you as a coach a better picture of what your athlete's ability is. The team individual assessment form, again, is going to provide self-rating of your team's ability. We will use these numbers for divisioning and matching of abilities of teams at the state tournament. Accurate scores are going to be to your advantage, to be as accurate as possible. It will help you as a coach, athlete, your team. It will help you play better, more equitable games during that tournament. We'll have fair and equitable tournament, and that's kind of what we are really striving to achieve. SOMT will enter team ratings into GMS for divisioning. So for this year, we need to have individual assessment forms only. We will not need that team. So the assessment forms that we are going to continue to use, we want to grade each athlete and partner in 6 categories. We will grade in ball handling, passing, movement, game awareness, shooting, and rebounding. Each player is going to get a numerical value, and then you will divide that number by 6. in order to get the athlete's overall rating. There are 6 categories, so we divide it by 6 to get that numerical value. And again, this process is going to be vital to be as accurate as you possibly can. It will not be necessary this year again to give us a team rating. So again, down here on the bottom, divide total score by 6 to determine that overall rating. Your player ratings are going to help us accurately division to the best of our ability. We're still going to have some outliers possibly, but the scores that you send are going to help us accurately division for this tournament. It'll set up a good tournament. And again, we'll have fair and equitable competition. Competition on Friday is going to be round robin tourney play to determine seeds for a seeded tournament to be held on Saturday. We'll get into the nuts and bolts of how we're going to set up the divisions, how we'll set up the pool play and seeded bracket play during our coach education events. Teams may be moved from any pool throughout pool play process in order to maintain competitive balance. So if there is a team that is placed into a pool that is underperforming or overperforming, the divisioning committee reserves the right to adjust that division prior to the medal round. Again, we want to make things as fair and equitable as we possibly can. Every effort will be made to guarantee the integrity of the games and divisioning process. The ultimate goal of the committee is to select divisions with teams of similar ability. The decision of the committee is final and may not be appealed or protested. Our coach trainings are set, and we'll get the link out to everybody. Each training will be event specific. It will include information regarding the tournament, bracketing, rules, venue information. We're also going to have guest presenters that will include information on healthy athletes as well as unified schools information as well. So the coach educations are taking a little different turn as well in order to give you good, solid, rounded information that you can in turn get to your athletes. Our 5v5 competition coach training is going to be held August 31st, and that'll be 5:30 to 6:30. Each of these trainings are scheduled for an hour. We may not need the entire hour, but we'll have that reserved if we need it. We went ahead and did the must-haves and everything like that in our preseason meeting tonight. So when we get into the 5v5, the 3-on-3, and the skills competition meetings, we can just focus on the coach education stuff. We won't have to backtrack and do some of the paperwork issues. So that was a little adjustment that we're making as well. We do have some updates regarding competition. Competition this year at the state tournament, we're going to add some competition for the athletes. We're going to have a competitive model for 5v5 as well as the player development model. So for unified 5v5, we will have a player development model, and then we will have a competitive model as well. And we'll talk briefly tonight about what that means. And then as we get into our coach education events, we'll talk about those a little bit more extensively. We are also going to add unified 3v3 basketball for state this year. In turn of trying to increase some competition, we're also looking at rules that will allow more complete basketball with the time constraints that we have. We'll have more clock stoppage opportunities during the state this year, and then we will also add free throws into the tournaments as well. We've had free throws in the rules in the past. It has not been used or utilized. We are going to utilize that this year, and again, we'll have more details concerning these a little bit later on in our coach educations. We're trying to schedule Friday and Saturday games of the same length. If we can adjust the schedules to make it work, we will not abbreviate Friday's games like in the past. Bracket setup will be discussed a little bit more in coach education. If we are unable to work through the schedule like we are hoping to, then we will move to abbreviated games like we have in the past. But the goal right now is to have solid basketball Friday and Saturday. Some competition reminders that we have for 5v5 traditional and unified, and then our unified competitive, and then 3v3 traditional and unified as well. Roster size maximum for 5v5 is going to be 12 athletes and partners, and then for 3v3 it will be 6. Game times, 2 15-minute halves with a 5-minute halftime for 5v5, 2 10-minute halves with a 5-minute halftime for 3v3. We'll have a running clock except for the last minute of each half. We'll have a running clock except for the first free throw. The clock will begin again as soon as the athlete or partner receives the ball for their second shot, then the clock will resume. Clock will stop for timeouts and substitutions within traditional and unified 5v5. Unified competitive, we'll have the running clock the last minute of each half. And again, we'll stop on first free throw, timeouts, and substitutions. 2 30-second timeouts for 5v5. That will be per team per half. And then if we go into overtime, 1 additional. For 3v3, we'll have 2 60-second timeouts per game. That will include overtime. So if you burn both of your timeouts during competition, then you will not get a timeout for overtime. We'll start the ball with 5v5 with a traditional jump ball, and then our 3v3 will keep the same format, and games will start with the flip of a coin, and we will alternate possession after that. We'll talk about some reminder rules and modifications for each event tonight. New rules and points of emphasis I'll have outlined in yellow. There were extensive rule changes made to the 3-on-3 game. In order to maintain accreditation for our program, we have to follow the sporting rules set forth by SONA. We do have a small amount of wiggle room for modifications. So with that being said, we have not adapted all of the new basketball rules. There are some rules that we have modifications for SOMT that we think allow for better basketball than some of the new rules that have been set forth. So for 5-on-5 traditional, again, just some reminder rules. Double dribbling and traveling will be enforced. Traveling up to 2 steps extra unless the athlete is given an advantage. So if they take 2 extra steps, obviously that's traveling. That may not necessarily be called unless it gets them past a defender or it gets them to an open shot or to a layup situation. 2 free throws are awarded, non-shooting, on and after the 7th team foul. Again, the clock will stop on the first shot and begin again when the shooter gets the ball for the second shot. 3-point shots will count as long as all courts in the venue have it marked, even 3-on-3. So if even one of the courts on the 3-on-3 venue is not marked with the 3-point line, 3-point lines will not count at all in that venue. So as long as the courts in your venue are marked with 3 points, then you can put those up. Press backcourt defense is allowed the last 2 minutes of each half, as long as your game is within 10 points. Unified player development. In addition to the normal 5v5 rules, we have modifications that will also apply for the unified player development. No single athlete or partner may account for more than 50% of his or her points in a game. After that, it will be considered player dominance. When bringing the ball down court, a mentor can accompany the athlete and provide instruction, but the athlete must be the person advancing the ball. Partners are allowed to play the game in player development, and partners are allowed to shoot in player development. It is not the responsibility of the officials on the court to monitor and determine meaningful involvement. It's the responsibility of you as coach to do so. With unified, only athletes can be replaced by athletes, and partners can only be replaced by partners. Principles of meaningful involvement must be followed at all times. If a team elects to place restrictions on their players, we are going to consider this a coaching philosophy. This coaching philosophy and style of play does not need to be followed by the opposing team. So if a coach is placing restrictions on their unified partners during the game, we want unified partners to be able to play, and we want unified partners to be able to shoot. If teams are restricting that, the opposing team does not have to follow that agreement. We want competition at our state tournaments. Our unified competitive model. The goal of our competitive model is to, again, provide meaningful competition to all athletes and unified partners involved, and we will have limited modifications to the rules. All athletes and our partners should be involved in meaningful competition and must enter the game in both halves. Failure to play all athletes and unified partners may subject the team to forfeiture or formal protest by the opposing team. For our competitive model, there will be no limitations on our athletes and no limitations on our partners. Our athletes and our partners in this competitive league should be of similar athletic ability, so we'll place no limitations on play. For in-game rules, we'll refer to the general 5-on-5 team competition rules. The competitive model divisions will be labeled on the divisioning report and the schedule that is released pre-game. Again, with our competitive model, team distribution, there must always be 2 unified partners and 3 athletes on the floor at all times. Game rules, double dribbling, traveling, all will be enforced. There's no extra steps. We want this to be as close to basketball without the modifications as we can. So all game rules will be enforced. Backcourt defense and press defense is allowable at any time, but it must be pulled off if the pressing team gains a 10-point advantage over their opponent. Our junior divisions, 8 to 15 years of age, cannot press. Only athletes, again, can be replaced by athletes. Partners can only be replaced by partners. Principles of meaningful involvement must be followed at all times. And again, if a team elects to place restrictions on their players, this is a coaching philosophy. This philosophy and style of play does not need to be followed by the opposing team. "3v3", again, this is where a lot of the rule changes had occurred. If the offending team is in the team foul situation, 2 free throws shall be awarded as of the 7th team foul. 2 free throws and ball possession will be awarded as of the 10th team foul. If a contact foul is committed on a player in the act of shooting, this occurs after the 7th team foul, because we're not going to shoot free throws 3v3 until after that 7th team foul has occurred. So if a player is fouled in the act of shooting after that 7th team foul, that player will be awarded with the number of free throws as follows. If the shot released from the field goal area is successful, the goal will count, and in addition, they will receive 1 free throw. If the shot is released from inside the arc is unsuccessful, 1 free throw. If the shot is released from behind the arc is unsuccessful, 2 free throws. Double dribbling and traveling with that 2 extra steps, unless given an advantage, will be enforced. Again, this will depend on score and or game situation. Officials can modify the frequency of calling these violations. Our unified 3v3 division this year will be player development. In this model, unified partners will in general have a higher skill level than athletes on the same team. The higher skilled players, athletes, or partners serve as both players and on-court mentors. In addition to the following, the traditional 3v3 rules, the following modifications will also apply for unified 3-on-3. No single athlete or unified partner may account for more than 50% of his or her team points in a game. After that, it will be considered player dominance. We need to have 2 athletes and 1 partner on the court at all times. It is not the responsibility of the officials on the court to monitor and determine meaningful involvement. It is the responsibility of you, the coach, to do so. Only athletes can be replaced by athletes. Partners can only be replaced by partners. Principles of meaningful involvement must be followed at all times. If a team elects to place restrictions on their players, again, this is the coaching philosophy. This coaching philosophy and style of play does not need to be followed by the opposing team. And again, just thank you for coming out this evening for our first preseason training. Again, we're going to work preseason webinars throughout the course of the year so that we can get pertinent information out early so that you can get that information to your athletes. And then we will focus on things a little bit differently within our coach education. And again, those coach education dates are here on your screen. 5v5, August 31st, 3v3, September 6th, and individual skills, September 7th. That is all that I have for this evening. If you have questions, hopefully you had been placing a few in the chat as we went through. If not, I can stay on with Brittany for a couple of moments to answer some of your questions. And I think I can unmute you if you need a question. So if there's nothing further, I'll go ahead and end the sharing, and I'll end the recording as well right now. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.